Welcome to the Fixing Your City podcast. Here's George Crandall.
Implementation fundamentals. Every framework plan requires an implementation strategy. At a minimum, an implementation strategy should stimulate downtown economic development, revitalize downtown retail, expand housing opportunities for all income groups, position the downtown to be resilient to the impacts of climate change. Momentum. One of the primary functions of an implementation strategy is to create immediate momentum for implementing the transformation strategy. Unless the public sees significant progress within the first 5 years after a transformation strategy has been adopted, the plan will ultimately have little chance to succeed. Urban designers like to prepare 25-year plans. Such plans are less worrisome because any proposed change will only happen in the distant future, if at all. It is non-threatening, but is also a non-plan. In 25 years' time, most everyone actively involved with the city, the politicians, the planning staff, the public activists, will very likely have moved on. Institutional memory will have faded, and advocacy for implementing the plan's recommendations will be non-existent. Some implementation strategy identifies hundreds of items that need to be put into action, with no established priority for which items should be implemented first. Most public agencies, however, are not capable of handling more than a few tasks at a time, so such a strategy will not lead to success. It is far preferable to stipulate that no more than half a dozen high-priority projects be undertaken within the first 5 years. Identifying a limited number of projects for implementation allows the community to focus their attention and resources on the most critical interventions. Public funding. When I make presentations around the country, I've come to expect that at some time fairly early on in the planning process, a florid-faced audience member, perhaps a little tipsy from the cocktail hour, will rise unsteadily to his feet, jab a finger in my direction, and ask, "So how are you going to pay for all of this?" Though the questioner is often hostile to any suggestion that may entail taxpayers' money, the question is always welcomed. With rare exception, the answer should be found in the framework plan itself, if it is bold enough. Any proposed public project should be of sufficient merit to stimulate substantial private investment. Otherwise, it should be reevaluated. But even cities with the most blighted downtowns in desperate need of transformation will often respond in horror at the suggestion that a strong public hand is required to reclaim the city. In my experience, the revenues to fund public improvements always show up when substantial private investment opportunities are created. The single most important part of any implementation strategy is the identification of funding sources for proposed public improvements. Tax increments financing works by taking advantage of anticipated future tax revenues based on the assumption that property values and consequently property tax receipts will reliably rise in and around substantive public improvements, provided the improvements are intelligently conceived and carried out. The anticipated growth in tax receipts can be pledged against the revenue bonds, thereby ensuring a project is properly capitalized. In 1961, voters in Oregon approved tax increment financing, which turned out to be the single most valuable step towards Portland's later Renaissance. A rule of thumb is that $1 of public money should stimulate at least $5 to $7 of private investment. The tax revenues from private investment will then be sufficient to pay off the bond. The ratio of public-private investment varies in every tax jurisdiction, though the above rule of thumb applies almost everywhere. Many city officials, elected or otherwise, do not fully appreciate how important the investment of public dollars is for bringing private money into the transformation effort. A public investment should be thought of as a pebble thrown into a calm pond, causing ever-extending ripples of private investment. Another common obstacle to successful transformation is the burden of previous financial commitments. Public monies can be tied up with a pet project of the mayor, city staff, or well-connected developer. These types of projects will differ from community to community, but they all share the potential for sucking up precious public resources without stimulating ongoing private investment. Consequently, they delay or even kill projects that would make a substantive difference in the community. Whatever the source of funds for public improvements, it is crucial that their availability be dependable over an extended period of time. An ongoing struggle to find money for strategic public improvements can stall or stop implementation momentum altogether. Of course, even the most carefully conceived financial program cannot in itself transform a city on its own. It must be wedded to an equally well-conceived physical design produced during the preparation of a framework plan. Public investment. Every city has a unique set of needs, and strategic public investments will vary accordingly. In my experience, public investments can be identified only through a rigorous planning process in which a number of alternatives can be evaluated and prioritized, and in which the public is involved in decision making. There are few exceptions to this fundamental principle. The first consideration should always be the choice of a public project in which to invest. Typically, the project should provide amenities that are lacking and offer the potential to improve the quality of life in the city. It may be an improvement to the pedestrian environment that stimulates retail development, or it may be a park or open space that creates a pleasant and welcoming investment environment. A central plaza that provides a place for public assembly and events is another possibility, as is a public parking structure that accommodates downtown shoppers and workers. I'm often asked where museums and performing arts centers fit into the hierarchy of public expenditures. Cultural nonprofit institutions do not generate tax revenues or stimulate private investment, at least not initially, and they should not be a top priority unless a city has a capacity to absorb negative cash flow. Expenditures for cultural facilities should wait until the later phase of transformation, when fundamental downtown public investments have been made and private investment is on the upswing. Timing is everything for successful transformation strategies. Private investment. An effective implementation strategy will stimulate substantial investment such as office buildings, hotels, retail facilities, and high-density housing. Many elected officials cling to the unfounded belief that the market will somehow allocate resources efficiently with favorable results for all. Consequently, it is often taken as an article of faith that, for the greater good, developers should be given the final word about what is to be built and how and where. This philosophy, regrettably, has produced many blighted downtowns and failed or abandoned transformation plans all over the country. Strategy oversight. Adoption of an implementation strategy is simple, the first step in an effort to transform a city. The next step is to appoint or assign responsibility for overseeing the implementation activities to a public oversight committee for a period of 5 years. Members of the oversight committee should include government leaders, respected business leaders, and a variety of interest groups. This is a critical final step because planning staffs cannot be relied on to implement a plan. They do not have political clout. They may not be able to withstand the political pressures that accompany many implementation projects, and they often move on to other staff positions or jobs. The business case. The business case is a valuable decision-making tool that describes the financial implications of different development scenarios. A business case includes build-out plans, build-out illustrations, development summaries, a financial analysis. Build-out plan. A build-out plan is prepared by assuming that all undeveloped and low-valued parcels of land in a study area will be developed or redeveloped over time. The process is not complicated. Plans are prepared with considerable consideration given to fundamental urban design principles, market demand, land use, realistic building footprints, neighborhood context. Build-out illustration. Three-dimensional drawings that illustrate the build-out plan are prepared. They identify building placement, occupancy, character, and height. Development summary. Tables are prepared. They quantify the areas for buildings and parking, the right-of-way improvements, the public investment, the value of private investment. Financial analysis. A financial analysis includes anticipated annual tax revenues that will result from private investment, the expected payback period for the public. Base case scenarios. The Edmonton Stadium Station redevelopment project in Canada illustrates how a business case functions in the process of transformation. Stadium Station, which opened in 1978, is one of 5 original stations built as part of Edmonton's light rail transit system. It is located in close proximity to Commonwealth Stadium. 30 years after the LRT system became operational, the station was still surrounded by vacant properties. In 2013, Edmonton decision makers asked my firm to prepare a redevelopment strategy that would stimulate private investment around the station. They wanted to see a range of scenarios that would illustrate the financial implications of various development densities and circulation alternatives. The business case provided the information they needed to make an informed decision. The Stadium Station business case evaluation included 3 scenarios. Scenario 1, the induced market scenario entailed the greatest public investment in order to stimulate the highest private investment. A strategic public improvement, in this case a retail main street, was the intervention that was identified. Scenario 2, the enhanced market scenario entailed some public investment, a public square and street improvements to enhance existing properties and make them more attractive to the development community. Scenario 3, the market trend scenario assumed no public investment would be provided and developers would assume responsibility for constructing any necessary infrastructure. The absence of public amenities would make properties less attractive to the development community. Scenario comparison. Scenario 1 was designed to attract the largest amount of private investment and included a main street that would provide much needed retail and commercial amenities in the underserved area. A new rail crossing that would connect new development to adjacent neighborhoods and a major regional fitness center, sports facilities, and stadium located there. The public investment was estimated to be approximately $10 million. Scenario 2 would not include a retail main street, but would provide a new rail crossing and a public square. The public investment was estimated to be $10 million. Scenario 2 would not include a retail main street, but would provide a new rail crossing and a public square. The public investment associated with this scenario was estimated to be approximately $7.7 million. Scenario 3 would not include a main street, rail crossing, or a public square. It was based on no public investment whatsoever. Letting the market decide would result in the least amount of private investment. Business case summary. The city decision makers and developers reviewed the business case summary and favored the increased development potential in scenario 1 and 2. Developers preferred scenario 2 because they felt that the retail main street in scenario 1 might be difficult to implement. A decision was made to implement scenario 2. Everyone agreed that scenario 3, leaving the development to the whims of the market, would have occurred if the business case had not been prepared. The business case illustrated that public investment in scenario 2 would result in more than double the private investment from scenario 3. Mixed use. Mixed use is a term planners use to refer to land uses that contain a variety of activities, such as retail, commercial, institutional, and housing. Mixed use development can occur horizontally or vertically. A horizontal mix means that a housing project could be built adjacent to an office building. A vertical mix means that housing, employment, or retail can be stacked on top of one another in a single building. The term mixed use is often misused to avoid the hard work of determining exactly which land use should work best in a city and precisely where they should be located. The term can end up being simply another way of saying, let the market decide. A wrong mix can devalue the project's contribution to the urban environment and the developer's investment. For example, most people would prefer to live in a residential neighborhood, not an employment district. Most employers generally prefer to be located in an employment district, not in a residential neighborhood. When these two uses are mixed together, the results may not always be successful. In general, a random horizontal mix of land uses can lead to degradation of the urban environment. A vertical mix can also present problems. Most people would prefer not to live in an office building, and most employers would prefer not to locate their offices in a building that contains housing. In the absence of a plan that designates exactly where retail would thrive, retail tends to be randomly scattered throughout an area, which is never as healthy as having a concentration of retail. It goes without saying that a city is inevitably a mix of land uses. The healthiest, most vibrant urban environments have concentrations of housing in the form of neighborhoods and concentrations of employment in other areas. The seams between housing neighborhoods and employment centers are transition areas that require special attention. The seam may be a good place to locate Main Street retail and shops, or to insert park blocks to create separation between employment and residential areas. The seam might also be an area where mixed-use work-live buildings make sense. Designating large expanses of the city as suitable for mixed uses, on the other hand, may lead to degradation, reduce the attractiveness of private investment, and diminish the quality of life. Game changers. Game changers are public investments that stimulate private development momentum. It is vital that a framework plan contain game changers, for without them, it will not succeed. Typical game changers are strategically located in visually prominent projects, such as plazas and parks. Improvements to the transportation system that create pedestrian-friendly streets or open up land for redevelopment are also game changers. Projects that are not part of the built environment, such as market studies, parking studies, branding exercises, or promotional campaigns, do not qualify as game changers because they are invisible to investors and the public. Because every city and town is different, an appropriate, effective game changer can be identified only through a systematic design exercise. Every completed framework plan should include the identification of game changers and a schedule for their implementation. Immediate momentum. A game changer has a potential to stimulate the substantial private investment within 5 years after its completion. In order to create a game changer, cities may sometimes link the expenditure of public funds with private investor agreements that commit private investors to follow up with specific construction projects once the game changer project is underway or completed. Strategic locating. For a game changer to be successful, location is critical. For example, a public plaza sited on the edge of the downtown in an undesirable neighborhood will do little to stimulate private investment, even though a plaza may be a welcome addition to a city. If it is located in the center of the city, however, it can be expected to attract significant private investment in the immediate vicinity. Public perception. When a game changer is built, it changes the public's perception of the city. In the past, people may have had little inclination or need to visit the downtown, but after construction of the game changer, the public will be attracted. The public's perception will be that the city is changing for the better. Private investment. Game changers are interventions that attract private investment. Investors and developers understand that a game changer will create investment opportunities and create and increase property values. Return on public investment. Before public funds are spent on a game changer, the public investment return should be estimated. A rule of thumb is that for every public dollar spent on a game changer, it should stimulate at least $5 to $7 in private investment. Typically, that ratio will generate enough tax revenues to pay off the public investment in a reasonable amount of time. Portland game changers. In 1970, downtown Portland was a grimy, amorphous grid with almost no commercial allure. It was not at all certain it could be redeemed under any circumstances. Portland was in desperate need of an urban intervention to reverse its downtown economic decline. A small group of activists realized that it was time to stop talking and to start putting together a plan that summarized the community's aspirations. The result was the 1972 downtown plan. Of the 23 projects proposed in the plan, 3 became game changers, altering the investor and public perception of the downtown from an undesirable backwater to an exciting and vibrant place to be. The 3 game changers were the Transit Mall, Waterfront Park, and Pioneer Courthouse Square. Ironically, they were presented in the last few pages of the plan, almost as an afterthought. If they had not been proposed and implemented, Portland would not be the highly desirable, livable, attractive city that it is today. In many ways, Portland has been lucky. The Transit Mall and Waterfront Park, both completed in 1978, transformed downtown Portland from a place to avoid to a place where everyone wanted to be. What was missing was a central public space that could function as a stage for celebrations and public events. That need was satisfied in 1984 with completion of Pioneer Courthouse Square. Portland Game Changer 1, Transit Mall. While I was working for Skid Row and Merrill, SOM, we were hired to design the Transit Mall for downtown Portland. The mall was going to be located on 11 blocks on 2 parallel streets, 22 blocks in all. Our design entailed widening the sidewalks, paving them with brick, and adding landscaping, benches, public art, and attractive bus shelters. I remember some of my SOM colleagues saying to me, the transit mall is going to be awful because the buses are going to be very noisy. But I wasn't concerned about the buses. All I really cared about was creating a downtown spine with widened brick sidewalks, landscaping, benches, banner poles, and public art that would attract the public. As I had hoped, the moment plans for the proposed transit mall went public, smart developers said, aha, now we know where the action is going to be in the downtown. Now we know where to build new projects. These developers understood the property is located along the transit mall would provide excellent investment potential, and they wisely cashed in on it. When the transit mall opened in 1978, several large building projects bordering the mall had already been completed or were under construction. Portland Game Changer 2, Tom McCall Waterfront Park. The Willamette River, which bisects Portland, had long been isolated from the city's downtown by a seawall and 4-lane 1940s freeway known as Harbor Drive that ran alongside it. A traffic study had suggested that the freeway be expanded from 4 to 6 lanes to accommodate future growth. In 1968, Governor Tom McCall halted the expansion, calling for the removal of the freeway and proposed building a waterfront park where the freeway had been. His recommendation was supported and promoted by Riverfront for People, a group of public activists who fought for public access to the river, and the Portland City Club, a prominent citizen-based research organization. In 1974, Harbor Drive was closed. It was the first major highway in America to be intentionally removed and not replaced. In 1978, a 37-acre riverfront park named after the far-sighted governor was opened to rave reviews, and downtown Portland, now reconnected to the Willamette River, has never been the same. Tom McCall Waterfront Park has become the staging area for many city and regional events throughout the year, and generates a substantial stimulus to the local economy for expenditures by visitors and shoppers. Portland Game Changer 3, Pioneer Courthouse Square. Portland had come to realize that their city, like all great cities, needed a well-defined, attractive focal point in the heart of its downtown, an open space that would be available for public events and assembly. San Francisco had its Union Square. Piazza San Marco is a familiar, well-loved center of Venice, Italy, and in Paris there is the Place de Concorde. Portland deserved a grand central plaza too. A site was selected for Portland's signature plaza opposite the city's handsome 19th century Italianate Pioneer Courthouse. At the time, a two-story parking garage owned by Myron Frank, a Portland-based department store chain, occupied the block. In the late 1960s, Myron Frank had wanted to erect an even bigger 11-story garage on the site, a prospective disaster for the downtown that was barely averted. By transforming the space into what would become Pioneer Courthouse Square, the city settled the future of the site for good. Not everyone was enthusiastic about the idea of creating a plaza. Many Portlanders thought it didn't make sense to establish an open space on a site where parking structure already existed. They proposed finding a vacant lot somewhere else in the city to build a plaza, a cheaper approach, but ill-conceived. The whole point of a plaza is for it to be in the center of the city. Eventually, Myron Frank was persuaded to relinquish the property in exchange for another site a few blocks away where a parking structure would be built at the city's expense. Then another concern surfaced. The mayor and his friends in the business community felt that the new square might attract undesirables to the downtown. They wanted half the block devoted to an active use in order to mitigate any possible problems. Several ideas were put forth, including a conservatory. A nationwide design competition was held to select the architect for the square. Of the 5 entries, only one was from Portland and from local architect Will Martin. His scheme entailed leaving the entire block as open space. When the judges reviewed the submissions, it quickly became apparent that only one would work, Martin's. His design won the competition. Unhappy with the outcome, the mayor refused to fund the construction of Martin's design. This prompted a public outcry and the formation of a citizen-initiated campaign to raise money for the project. Several fundraising innovations, including selling individual paving bricks that bore the donor's name, an idea that has since caught on all across the country, were successful, and Martin's popular design was built. Pioneer Courthouse Square opened to the public on April 6, 1984, to widespread popular and critical acclaim. Fondly referred to as Portland's living room, today the square hosts over 300 events annually and attracts nearly 10 million visitors each year. Portland Game Changer 4, Lovejoy Ramp Removal. In 1988, Portland City Center plan expanded the designated downtown area northward into what was then known as the Northwest Industrial Triangle. At the time, the 253-acre site contained an abandoned rail yard, warehouses, and light industrial enterprises. The Lovejoy Ramp, an elevated 1920s automobile viaduct, bisected the district. In 1999, the viaduct was demolished and replaced with an on-grade roadway. Opening up the land for redevelopment led in turn to the creation of what is known as the Pearl District. Today, the Pearl has become a thriving, high-density, mixed-use neighborhood with a population of over 7,000 and employment for over 12,000. Portland Game Changer 5, Aerial Tram. In 1988, Central City Plan also expanded the designated downtown area southward onto a 140-acre parcel of brownfield, land previously used for industrial purposes. South Waterfront, as the district is now known, is one of the largest urban redevelopment projects in the United States. From the beginning, the area had been envisioned as an urban mixed-use neighborhood with condominiums, apartments, and medical research facilities. Oregon Health Sciences University, OHSU, which is situated above the South Waterfront District, on top of Markham Hill to the west, had been looking for expansion space. The suburbs were an option, as was the South Waterfront area. The problem with the South Waterfront was its circuitous 2-mile drive distance from the OHSU Hilltop campus. As a bird flies, though, the two sites were relatively close. The solution: build an aerial tram to link the top of the hill with the waterfront. Construction of an aerial tramway was a catalyst that allowed that vision to become a reality. The tram, completed in 2006 at a cost of $57 million, travels a distance of 3,300 feet with a gain in elevation of 500 feet. While most passengers tend to be affiliated with OHSU, the tram is open to the public and is popular for easy access to the Hilltop campus. Tourists enjoy splendid views of the city and Mount Hood in the distance. In 2004, mixed-use development broke ground in the South Waterfront area. By 2014, 7 residential towers, each between 21 and 30 floors high, and 2 Oregon Health Sciences medical buildings had been completed. Additional Oregon Health Sciences University buildings representing an investment over $1 billion are soon to follow. The aerial tram enabled the landlocked Oregon Health Sciences University campus on Markham Hill to expand into the South Waterfront District over half a mile away, a move that created the potential for thousands of new jobs for healthcare workers and researchers. The development community correctly understood the expanded medical facilities would translate into substantial demand for more housing and for commercial and retail space in close proximity to the buildings. Since the tram's completion, the South Waterfront has experienced explosive growth. In every community, the type of game changers with the greatest potential for providing a major stimulus will be different. Whatever it is, the game changer will always be part of a larger, comprehensive redevelopment strategy, never a standalone project. Marion Street renovation, Oak Park, Illinois. In Oak Park, Illinois, the game changer was the renovation of the Marion Street Mall, a pedestrian-only street. It had been trendy in the 1970s to create pedestrian-only shopping streets that were closed to automobile traffic. However, like many other communities that had tried this experience, Oak Park did not have sufficient population density to support the street closure and retail sales declines. Soon, vacant storefronts were lining the street. Marion Mall businesses were not the only business that had been impacted by the street closure. All of Oak Park's downtown retail suffered from the restricted automobile access the closure had created. Without convenient access, downtown shopping quickly declined. When I proposed opening up Marion Mall as a first step in transforming downtown, Marion Mall businesses protested. A hairdresser, for example, enjoyed having depressed rental rates. Because of the nature of his business, he didn't have to rely on either pedestrian traffic or drive-by traffic. At one point in a public meeting, he declared to the audience, "If Marion Mall is reopened, leases will go up and I'll be out of business." That was the sentiment of many of the remaining businesses on the street. Obviously, no one wanted to create a situation in which longtime businesses would feel the pressure to relocate. But at the same time, it was important to everyone concerned to improve the downtown's economy. In the end, the decision was made to reopen Marion Street, which underwent a major design. The reconstruction had a strong pedestrian bias, including wider sidewalks, on-street parking, landscaping, and special lighting. Ultimately, the street reopening was a success for Marion Street and for the entire downtown. Improved automobile circulation attracted shoppers and stimulated retail sales for everyone. Street transformation. Lake Oswego, Oregon. In Lake Oswego, the game changer was a demonstration project intended to transform an automobile-dominated street into a pedestrian-friendly one. Lake Oswego was typical of many suburban communities. Its downtown retail was scattered and lacked focus. I was convinced that an effective way to revitalize the retail was to turn its A Avenue, a pedestrian hostile 5-lane roadway through the middle of town, into a pedestrian-friendly street. To test the idea, a 1-block, 2-intersection demonstration project was designed and constructed in front of City Hall. Curb extensions, landscape medians, wide sidewalks, special street furniture, and lighting created an environment desirable to investors and shoppers. The 4 lanes of traffic and on-street parking would remain. The project opened to rave reviews, and soon an additional 3 blocks were completed, as well as the construction of more retail projects on A Avenue and the intersecting streets. Now, Lake Oswego now has a distinctive downtown that regularly draws people to its many shops and restaurants. Park blocks, Medford, Oregon. The game changer in Medford, Oregon was the design of Middleford Commons, a series of new park blocks that were built in a partially abandoned downtown warehouse district. The city of Medford had come to realize that unless it had a plan to redevelop the warehouse area, development would be piecemeal and not supportive of downtown transformation, the city's ultimate aim. My firm suggested organizing new development around a set of 3 park blocks connecting to Main Street. We specified exactly the types of stores, housing, and other structures to be built, and provided schematic drawings of each type to illustrate precisely what was needed. We had estimated the total cost for building the park blocks at around $10 million, and forecast that in return approximately $150 million in new private investment would be generated. Unfortunately, $10 million was more than Medford could afford. As it turned out, Lithia Motors, a major national car dealership with a number of retail outlets across the city, owned several of the blocks slated to become park blocks, and they announced their intention to build an auto mall and company headquarters on the outskirts of town. Then a remarkable thing happened. When Lithia management saw the plan for the park blocks, they liked the scheme so much they changed their mind and decided to locate their new headquarters building alongside the proposed park blocks. Also, they believed that the park blocks would help them solve another of their problems. According to their national recruiting efforts, the majority of desirable job candidates preferred to live in a downtown, not in the suburbs. Park block plan would be perfect for them. Because the cost of building the park blocks was beyond the city of Medford's budget, Lithia offered to pay for the construction with the agreement that the city would pay them back with tax increments generated by the construction of other new buildings that were sure to come. The park blocks have been built along with the first phase of Lithia's headquarter complex, and Medford has benefited significantly, transforming a backwater in the city to a desirable place to live and work. Silver bullets. I refer to public actions with long-term negative political and/or financial impacts as silver bullets. I call them silver bullets because they are the product of magical thinking. We think they are going to be the cure for an ailing city, but in fact they often end up making things worse. For cities to stay healthy, they need to dodge the silver bullets that show up from time to time. Silver bullet projects are often sold to the public as game changers. Sometimes they are the pet projects of the governor, the mayor, a member of city staff, or a well-respected developer. Silver bullets differ from community to community, but they all share the same potential for using precious public financial resources without stimulating ongoing private investment. Consequently, they delay or even terminate other projects that can make a real difference to a community. Major damage to a city can be avoided if silver bullets are identified and stopped before a single shovelful of dirt is turned over. Silver bullets will be inevitable if a city does not have a transformation strategy in place that creates a framework for effective decision making. In the absence of such a framework, decisions regarding land use and transportation issues will be little more than guesswork. Portland's silver bullets. Mount Hood Freeway. An excellent example of a Dodge silver bullet is the Mount Hood Freeway project that was proposed for Portland in the 1970s. The original plan prepared by the Oregon Department of Transportation, ODOT, in 1955 called for 9.2 miles of freeway to cut through Portland's east side neighborhoods. In 1969, construction was ready to begin at a cost of $500 million, funded by a mix of 90% federal funds and 10% state and local revenues. The last hurdle before work could begin was the preparation of an environmental impact statement, EIS, in order to comply with the 1969 National Environmental Protection Act. In 1971, ODOT hired the Portland office of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, SOM, to prepare the EIS. Personnel from SOM's Baltimore office who had relevant experience with the freeway studies were transferred to Portland to work on the project. Knowing almost nothing about freeways, but with a degree in civil engineering, I was recruited to join the team. The Mount Hood Freeway project was typical of the dynamic often associated with larger transportation studies. Transportation engineering firms with a fundamental conflict of interest are often retained as consultants, and this project was no exception. This is how it works. State transportation agencies serve as a client for freeway construction, and they expect the transportation consultant preparing EIS materials will understand the task at hand is to deliver good news to promote the project. Bad news could halt the project. Transportation consultants are, of course, keenly aware that state agencies may not consider them for future projects if their EIS findings are unfavorable. ODOT had assigned minders to the Mount Hood EIS study. The job of the minders was to be on the lookout for anything that might be viewed as negative in the EIS. If they found something questionable, they would edit the text and sanitize the findings. There were other problems. The transportation sub-consultants who had been hired to assist the SON team were biased in favor of the freeway, and they tried to make the numbers in support of reconstruction look particularly good. For example, the sub-consultants projected travel times with computer models, but these projections were not accurate. To address the resulting inconsistencies, I would often have to sit down with them and negotiate more accurate figures. As one of the EIS project managers, I had to figure out how to splice the planned new roadway into Portland's existing freeway system. The unspoken truth was that the problem could never be solved because the existing freeway loop simply did not have the capacity to accommodate the anticipated traffic demands from the new freeway. The Mount Hood Freeway EIS was published in 1973 with the title I-80N Environmental Study, Freeway Design Alternatives, Volume 1. A separate report entitled A Range of Options, Volume 2, outlined the alternative options to build the freeway, such as transit-based solutions and other roadway configurations that included transit. The EIS report made it very clear that the trade-off for a modest reduction in time travel was a massive disruption to the east side neighborhoods, the displacement of 1,700 homes and 5,000 people. Oregon decision makers carefully studied the EIS findings and wisely pulled the plug on the project. And just as importantly, they succeeded in convincing the federal government to transfer approximately $180 million of the funds that had been allocated to the Mount Hood Freeway towards construction of a light rail LRT system for Portland. The decision to not build the freeway turned what would have been a silver bullet into a game changer. Having the federal monies to construct the LRT system marked the beginning of Portland's shift from total reliance on an automobile to something far saner and more environmentally sound. A convenient, state-of-the-art public transit system to bring people into the city center. If the freeway had been built, the already congested freeway system would have become virtually non-functional. Portland's downtown would have been choked with traffic, and the benefits of light rail would have been compromised and delayed for years. It took courage for Oregon's decision makers to turn down the freeway when funding was already in the bank. But the payoff for downtown Portland has been enormous. Cleaner air and more than 40% of all downtown employees arriving by transit. Columbia River Crossing. Oregon and Washington share the banks of the Columbia River, which serves as a border between the two states. Portland is on one side of the river and Vancouver on the other. Traffic between the neighborhood cities can be quite congested. A 6-lane truss bridge connects the two metropolises. To ease congestion, the Oregon and Washington Departments of Transportation proposed constructing a replacement bridge which became known as the Columbia River Crossing. In addition to improving the flow of traffic, the proposed new bridge would be built to current seismic standards, an important consideration in the earthquake-prone region. Planning and design of the CRC commenced in 2005. By 2013, $200 million had been spent, but in June of that year, the project was terminated. What went wrong? The CRC had been undertaken as a much-needed transportation improvement, but over time it became a silver bullet project that needed to be stopped. First, during the planning and design process, a fundamental step had been ignored: the inclusion of alternative options for public evaluation. Only one solution to the problem had been proposed, and one embraced by the people working on the project. Other points of view were missing. Also was the estimated final cost of $3.4 billion. The proposed bridge was simply not affordable, and further evaluation revealed that the scheme did not meet the project's primary objective, which was to relieve congestion. Most troubling of all, because of the proposed bridge's substantial height, it would obstruct some boats from traveling along the river. The public quickly understood that the CRC was seriously flawed and objected strenuously to its construction. Other solutions that worked better and saved billions of dollars were developed and promoted by citizen activists. For example, the common sense alternative, CSA, which I helped develop, cost less than 1/3 of the CRC's total $3.4 billion budget. Nonetheless, thanks to a massive lobbying campaign funded by various labor and business interests, the CRC was approved by the Oregon legislature. Fortunately, Washington's legislature turned it down. By dodging this silver bullet, both Oregon and Washington avoided the serious depletion of their already scarce highway funds, as well as a number of destructive impacts from the CRC, including increased traffic congestion on other routes as motorists tried to avoid the expensive bridge toll, the obstruction of river traffic from the low-hung bridge, and increased air pollution in North Portland. Silver bullets in other cities. Competing retail center in Lincoln, Nebraska. Every city has its share of silver bullet projects. In Lincoln, Nebraska, a capital city with approximately 250,000 people, situated among rolling hills in the southeastern corner of the state, I encountered the ambitious Antelope Valley Project. The project was intended to transform a large area of the eastern edge of the downtown Lincoln into a type of retail development known as a lifestyle center. Like shopping malls, which are indoor versions of old Main Street shops, lifestyle centers are like movie sets, outdoor malls that masquerade as uniquely themed historical main streets, or as European like town squares with shopping, dining, and entertainment. The problem with lifestyle centers is that, like suburban malls, they compete for retailers and suck the life out of the downtown main streets. They also increase dependency on the automobile because they are accessible only by car. Professional planners nevertheless find them hard to resist, as was the case in Lincoln. One of the cardinal rules of transformation is to save the heart first. In other words, it is more important to focus transformation efforts first in the core of the city. The central downtown is where the history of the city lies and where its heart is. So when my firm was retained to produce a downtown transformation strategy for Lincoln, I told city officials the Antelope Valley Project would be like a knife to the heart of the downtown. It might have been comparatively easy to build a new retail center on the edge of downtown, but the Antelope Valley Lifestyle Center would have absorbed all the retail business from downtown for many years to come. Fortunately, city officials understood the conflict, and Lincoln's silver bullet was eventually dropped. Condominium project, Oak Park, Illinois. When we began preparing a downtown framework plan for Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago and birthplace of writer Ernest Hemingway, we found the city had committed to a silver bullet. The project was a private mixed-use condominium project that required a large expenditure of public funds in order to proceed. The public was upset, and rightly so, with the proposed expenditure of public money on a private project. Since the condominium would leverage very little additional private investment, my candid advice was to ditch the project. This advice, unfortunately, was too late in coming. In time to express their displeasure, the public voted out the village board members who had approved the condominium. Competing plan, Casper, Wyoming. In Casper, Wyoming, a silver bullet was a major planning effort for an area adjacent to the downtown known as the Old Yellowstone District. The plan had just been completed when my firm was hired to prepare a downtown transformation strategy. It soon became clear that the Old Yellowstone District plan would be in conflict with our efforts to revive the downtown core. If implemented, some of the proposed land uses for the Old Yellowstone District would end up degrading the potential for the downtown's future development. This problem is typical of what happens in many cities. Plans are developed for areas adjacent to the downtown without first resolving what needs to happen in the core. Piecemeal planning and out-of-sequence planning efforts produce silver bullets.
Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe to get updates for future chapters.